Today we're going to talk about vulnerability, the first of 3 powerful principles to transform your well-being. We're going to look at what vulnerability looks like for a lawyer and why it's so important. I used to think it was weak to ask for support. There's a perception that successful people, they don't need sleep, they don't need time out, they don't need to ask for support. A Law Society article highlights certain characteristics that solicitors share, including fear of failure, perfectionism, which can contribute to poor mental health.
So what made the difference for us was to take on being vulnerable. And for us that meant coming to terms with chronic illnesses. But for you that could be anything that you're dealing with, whether that's a bereavement or a difficult divorce or anything that you're struggling with at the moment, however big or small.
So let's consider what vulnerability looks like. Dr. Brené Brown is the key expert on this area, and what we have done is applied her wisdom specifically to lawyers. When we talk about vulnerability, what we're really talking about is having the courage to show up powerfully and let ourselves be seen. It's tough though when we're concerned about how that may impact on our career. By the way, we're not talking about oversharing. Brené Brown uses a classic example of oversharing when she talks about it not being live tweeting a bikini wax. This is about not holding things back and not hiding something when you know that it would be helpful to share it. For example, when Lauren and I decided to share our own personal stories on video, that took real courage for us. But we did it knowing that it would serve the purpose of breaking down the stigma attached to certain illnesses.
What might hold us back from being vulnerable though, is the possibility that we might experience shame. So shame, for instance, that when I tell my boss I need support, he'll think I'm weak, or I'll be worried about my career prospects. Or shame that if I'm not clear on something, then I'll be perceived as stupid or be judged. So how do we get around this? Well, Brené Brown has the answer. So she talks about putting shame in a petri dish and feeding it with silence and secrecy and judgment, and it grows. And then putting shame in a petri dish and dousing it with empathy, and it can't survive. Now, I suffered from depression and was off work for 7 months when I was a lawyer. And when I did go back to my job and started to share with my team what had happened, the thing that really helped was my boss pulling me aside and saying, "I think you're really brave for coming back, Lauren." And then he went on to share his own wellbeing challenges that he'd been through and he'd had to take time off work for, which I had no idea about. Now, he didn't have to do that, but he chose to respond to my vulnerability in a vulnerable way with empathy. And I just didn't experience any shame as a result.
Just hearing responses like, "I don't even know what to say to you right now, but I'm just so glad you told me," make all the difference. Contrast that with a response like, "Well, at least you had some time off work," which just feeds the shame. On a macro level, having a culture in an organisation where people have permission to be vulnerable and are vulnerable, and then that vulnerability is being met with empathy, leads to 2 things, according to Brené Brown's research. First, innovation, creativity, and change. Second, more human connection.
So what does this mean for the legal profession? Well, more innovation and creativity mean better results and solutions for our clients, which ultimately makes us better lawyers. And more human connection means better relationships. There's an ease, effortlessness, and effectiveness to our communication. Nothing goes unsaid. So think about one action step that you could take to show vulnerability. What do you need to do to serve your well-being right now? It could be as simple as having the courage to say no.